Thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you like what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe, and see you next week. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spirit Talk. And today I get to finally have my good friend and author, JT Patten, on the show. JT has a background in government intelligence and military special operations with counterterrorism, warfare strategies, some of them unconventional. He's also an Amazon #1 best-selling author, the thriller world, as well as a horror writer. He's part of the Horror Writers Association and currently works in the cybersecurity field. And I thought I was busy with different hats everywhere and stuff, but with your background, it's pretty surreal to think that I got to know you through a vampire story, and here you are. But so before we even get to all that, finally great to have you on here. For those that are part of the Spirit Talk Book Club, box #2 actually had Gypsy Whispers of a Gypsy, the box #2 of the book club. So some of the people here that will be listening to this will already get a brief introduction to JT through that book. But it's great to have you on here, man.
No, thanks so much. Appreciate it, and enjoyed the growing friendship over the last year. So
yeah, it's one of those things where it feels like I've been wanting to get you on here. I know I've had some other issues and time and schedule come up, but it feels like I've known you forever just through social media. But it's good to actually see a face and kind of do this thing here proper. But before I start, with your background, I know we're going to touch upon all the counterintelligence and everything going on there, but growing up, was this the route you thought you were going to take? Like, how did you kind of jump into this? Because in hindsight, you picked a pretty good career path that has affected all of us.
Yeah, I guess they all kind of converged more naturally than I would have thought. But I had to enter every single one of them probably from a back door. I think that I guess most of my life's been a little bit, reshaping or like a chameleon. And I think in most cases, I probably wasn't good enough to come through the front door in almost all of those situations. So I grew up, in the 70s, 80s, in my 50s, a lot of just, backyard play, adventures, breaking stuff, throwing rocks at trains, riding a bicycle, miles and miles and just coming home at dark. I think I also grew up in kind of that era. We had a lot of our dads were Vietnam vets, and so we had like a lot of old memory things around. And so I think that and just maybe that adventure aspect of it. I know that I had a lot of interest in kind of military things at the time, Green Berets, Navy SEALs in Vietnam. That was really intriguing. We had grandparents that were out in Arkansas. So most of my, the summers and stuff we were spending on boats in like kind of, swamps and lakes and, shooting water moccasins, learning how to shoot BB guns, 22s, fishing and all that stuff. I was less interested in like Boy Scouts at the time and more into Indian guides with my dad. So we did a lot more, camping type things there. It was less service based, more tracking, trailing and stuff like that. So I think that was really of interest to me. And as I got into high school, I think it was apparent to me also that I really love the creative aspect of things. I love to write. I love to read different creative type things. I didn't like textbooks. I didn't like math. And I didn't do real well as a student. I did, pretty well with like shooting and stuff. So I think I joined a junior rifle team at our local police department, and I think that was even pretty much as to what I wanted to do when I went into college. And so join ROTC, be on the rifle teams and stuff like that. Study abroad, travel. My dad, however, and my mom, didn't want me to do the law enforcement stuff, and that I really gravitated towards. My dad didn't have a great experience in Vietnam. My uncles didn't have great experience in Vietnam, World War II, and in Korea and stuff like that. So they really were trying pretty hard to push me away from that aspect. And so even though I took like the business route, I still kept finding myself pulled back into that world that I really enjoyed most, but wasn't really being, I don't want to make it sound like a, sucking my thumb, but it wasn't really supported. And so I had to kind of find my way out around that. So I'll just kind of pause there for just kind of taking me up to like the college or the
Yeah,
graduation part.
it's one of those things where it's like if you don't have that, as you know now, that support circle at home, especially in these type of high stress environments, military law enforcement type stuff, if you don't have that support system around you, I would feel lost. I was fortunate when I did all that stuff to have that in place. But even still, the people I used to work with in this world that didn't have that, I'd always feel bad because they would a lot of resort to drinking or whatever vices they had to cope with the idea that it's a high stressful job, whether you're being shot at or just a high stakes environment where lives are being saved or being lost, and it's a it takes a special mindset to actually even consider putting yourself in there. Because like I settled the Secret Service, but I loved the idea of kicking down a door, DEA or ATF, watching the movies and TV shows. And thank God I had people around me say, hey, that's a movie. That this isn't, not everything's John Rambo, right? And so kind of just going through the whole process with my whole mental kind of like headspace for that was super surreal. You you mentioned like the play in the woods. Is that something to kind of jump to present day where you raising your kids today and stuff was something vital to their upbringing as well?
Not so much. I mean, it was a part of it because I like to still be out in, the
Yeah.
woods, like to fish and do outdoor things. But the aspect that I really liked about some of it was the sneakiness, and I think that once I, got that experience that I was looking for, I realized that it was maybe maybe not optimal for the lifestyle that I also wanted to have. And so I think that I was very, very cautious. So my two daughters, they're in college now. They always enjoyed some of the fishing and being outdoors and stuff like that, but they were never like big into the camping side of it. Same with my son, and I think a lot of that also had to do with just kind of our friendship circles and stuff. It was a little bit more sports oriented, so we didn't have as much time with that. And I think that even some of our travels were a little bit more, going to the beach, Caribbean, and that type of thing. I really enjoy scuba diving. So I think that on the one hand, I wanted them to embrace or appreciate it. But on the other hand, I definitely didn't want to steer too much, especially my son, into some of those areas because of what I learned, what I gathered. Actually, ironically, I thought I'd kind of dodged a bullet with him. And as he's looking to college now, just the other night, he was saying, are you sure that I couldn't go into the military? Are you sure that the Navy wouldn't be there? And we were watching Top Gun Maverick the other night. And he's like, it would be so awesome to be a fighter pilot and so great.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I, had reached out to a couple friends just even the other day saying, are you willing to have a chat with him for both the good glamour side of it and the not so glamorous side? And so we'll see where that takes us.
Were you writing during this college high school time frame? Like how would you like what a weird, not weird, but like very like
Yeah.
other authors I've talked to in this world, it was a couple were like either retired military got bored and writing was their thing, or they always loved doing the note taking, the research, everything kind of went with like the work you guys were doing.
So I really liked research. But again, I was, going to college in the late 80s. We didn't have computers, so everything
Oh,
was kind of by book and card catalog. My writing, was a word processor if I could borrow one, or it was, floppy disk. And in the English class, I had to take a couple classes in college that were, a lot of writing and stuff, and I got C's and D's in those, and I just could not fathom why, because I felt like I was a good storyteller, I was a good writer. Um, it wasn't even about the mechanics. I just didn't have teachers that appreciated some of the things that I was doing. I still, even looking back, I mean, sometimes we over you know grandize what who we are and what we can do and stuff,
yeah, of
but
course.
I thought it was decent. And so I think that while I would have loved to have chased that path a little bit more even on my own time, it was definitely not nurtured. and definitely was not validated in any way. So I figured I just absolutely have to suck. So why, let's just kind of cross that one off too. And so I think, there's just a lot of figuring out around that time. I think what probably in the end got me a little bit closer to that space was, as I said, I did join Army ROTC. I was a disaster in that too. I really didn't want to embrace the conventional side of things. Everything I wanted was, unconventional. And I still remember, like in a land nav exercise with my ranger buddy, I could figure my way around, but I was having to listen to him too, and he was steering us wrong. And finally, we were just lost as all hell. It was night. I just started going to where I saw some lights and sound, found like a carnival that was going on, kind of a fest, and literally, just like you'd see in the movies, stole some clothes because we had our fatigues on, put some things over, and then just went to the road and kind of hitchhiked our way. And somebody's like, "Are you guys over by the camp? The Boy Scout camp? Doing some stuff?" He goes, "Sometimes, the Army guys, the ROTC guys do stuff." We're like, "Hey, yeah, drive us back." So I thought that was really kick ass, because I was able to figure that out. Here we are, unconventional, and the cadre instead was like, you left your ranger buddy for a while, you didn't follow the instructions, and first, before you can be unconventional, you have to be conventional to understand certain things. And I think they understood that in me. And so I think as I had some more shortcomings there in the whole thing, later on they introduced me to a recruiter during one of the college, open, recruiting fests and stuff like that, and career fair, and I was introduced to somebody at the CIA, and they thought that might be a little bit better fit for some things, and so I embraced some of those introductions that later on being a little bit more fruitful to my later involvement in the intelligence community.
Well, it's like when you meet those, have those introductions with people like that, CIA and these other agencies, was it something you didn't realize that as it comes to know, you get it, you start doing foreign language studies, unconventional warfare, these different outlets that pertain to the larger picture here. When you first kind of do this counterterrorism type stuff, what was your idea of what counterterrorism was, and how much has it changed since you've got the experience and seen how the world's kind of changed over time?
Yeah, so at the time, I think even there wasn't that much terrorism like we see it
Right.
today, as much as was hijackings.
Yeah.
So the recruiter that I was introduced to, he was part of the science and technology group. He introduced me to another guy by the name of Dewey Claridge, that is a household name to a lot of folks that know much about the agency and counterterrorism and stuff like that. Dewey took the time to also look at what I was doing curriculum wise and said, pick up more languages, do this and that. So I ended up studying abroad, and I was able to, to pick up the phone every now and then. And he encouraged me to get to know as many of the Arabs that I possibly could. Stay away from the Frenchmen. He was, get to know the real, the dirt of that. I picked up Arabic. I picked up Spanish. Did the international business thing, went to North Africa and stuff. So I think it was a little bit of a grooming side. And so my French was less going to be about the Parisian side and Northern Europe and going to those other areas, but learning it more from the Sahara which ultimately was where I started getting my foray by learning about the Tuaregs and different cultures. And even after 9/11, when I was kind of still getting my way into that side, again, it was kind of backdoor, understanding the people and then understanding how intelligence was collected and human sources were being developed and stuff, and learning that we didn't necessarily have to do it by the inducements, but really understanding the people first and understanding what was, good or bad to them, and then being able to pull on those levers. So I would say from that standpoint, I probably had some really kick-ass coaching. I was introduced, I think, through that science and technology side to some guys that were doing competitive intelligence against China and stuff. And they turned out to be a company. It was Phoenix Consulting. It used to be a bunch of ex MACD-SOG warriors and stuff. Even at the time, there were some old OSS guys. So I think that it was just a really unique time where I could get involved with a lot of these people that saw some type of a potential, and got a little bit of coaching along the way that introduced me to some circles and less conventional ways of getting involved than, as I mentioned earlier, coming in the front door.
As you kind of go through like the training and different missions and obviously the stuff you're doing, an event like 9/11 happens and other stuff since then, obviously. But when that happens, is there like a reset in what you know or like training? Or because obviously we always hear like the bad guys are always gonna be one step ahead, right? But how much does that affect when it comes to like the counterintelligence community with something that happens like that? Like, how did this fall through the cracks?
Yeah, so I think I was still on the fringes of that aspect of it. I mean, I was at the time I was getting married. I was, I was living in Chicago still. Um, I was I was doing like consulting work, but I was also, again, kind of doing this other stuff too. And then I started learning about supply chains and whatnot. And so, really, when it came down to, I think, the 9/11 and deciding, hey, I want to get into the game and reaching out to certain people that brought me in, officially and unofficially in there. I think it started first looking at it from almost the OSS mind standpoint of, okay, here we're seeing that we've got some, terrorists or other groups that might be, against us. And I started having to break down from that cultural knowledge to break down then their social conventions, how they monetize things. And so I was taking from the business aspect that I had also been learning, and then figuring out how I could disrupt businesses, disrupt commerce, disrupt what have you. So even then, like 4 years, 5 years later, as we're going into Iraq, some of the first work that I was doing with the intelligence community was social network disruption of the IED system. So looking at all the elements that they have to put together IEDs, whether it's family ties, monetary ties, and stuff like that, and then figuring out where they fit into society so that we could disrupt them either by going in and kinetically killing them, or what we had was this kind of lytic cycle, as you think about with a virus, where it just kind of spreads organically, creating distrust and whatnot. And, I think you probably heard over years, sometime back in Vietnam, they'd have all the rounds that would like blow up. And so if
Yeah.
they found stuff, they wouldn't want to do it. So we did some of those type of like really jacked up stuff for them, and that was kind of fun, creative stuff, and I think that's where I got the start, and then understanding, okay, how other groups think, not necessarily as bad guys, removing myself from that, but just thinking of in terms of how does that society function. And I think that gave a real good perspective for both counterintelligence and counterterrorism, of not necessarily demonizing anybody, but more thinking of it from their view. And I think as later on I got into writing my own books and creating the fiction stuff, whether it was a bad guy or good guy, almost all of my books, whether it's horror or thrillers, everything operates kind of in the gray,
Yeah.
because it's not a clear black and white in this world. I'm not about to make my heroes all come in on white hats. Nor am I going to have all the bad guys, twisting their mustaches.
Right.
And so I think that makes it more true, and maybe even a little bit more interesting.
When something like the Patriot Act or other bills and stuff with that counterintelligence stuff, and as it pertains to terrorism, when that stuff gets rolled out on paper, it sounds amazing. But as years go by, whether it's rights are taken or people what claim that their rights were or taken through this act or other means, that's like to whatever. I get the idea of protecting the best interests of the people, but at what point does cybersecurity and counterterrorism actually overstep their bounds and maybe take some of these rights or pieces of rights that we have as humans to ourselves? Like, it's always seems like a fine line to me. It's like I'm glad people like you and these other men and women I know that are able to like excel in there, because part of it I don't really understand a lot of it, and I think the problem is it's not put out to the masses the right way where people understand what necessarily. Now you can't say this is what the CIA or this is whoever what they're
Yeah.
doing, but the idea behind this is to stop this. And I think the rollout of the Patriot Act, it can only roll out when it did because everyone's still high off the Russia. We're gonna go kick all these terrorists' ass. If it came out today, I think there'd be so much more pushback. Maybe I'm reading that wrong.
No, I think you're probably right. And I don't know necessarily what the balance is. I admit that I am a bit hawkish on that view
And I
of
so am I.
probably,
Yeah.
and I definitely think that, it's kind of like kids. I'm doing what's best for you, even though you don't understand it now. And I think that there's some things that we might do that take away perceived civil liberties and things that ultimately are being done for a reason, that are more going to protect versus exploit. I don't subscribe to all of the conspiracies of what's going on with the information. I mean, if you saw how much information is
Oh,
collected, and to do it for Joe Booger Eater next door, who's worried that with his tinfoil hat, that but they're going to take all of his information, exploit it, and put his porn on the site, and he's going to get fired and stuff like that. Nobody gives a shit about that. Okay, nobody's got time to deal with that. So I think that when it comes to, sometimes monitoring some stuff, tightening some things. I mean, even if we look back to Patriot Act and some of the like anti-money laundering stuff that, so like, oh, you guys are going to take my stuff for $10,000 and you're going to start investigating me. Yes and no. I think sometimes it makes sense with know your customer. I think when here I've been one on the counterterrorism side, disrupting monetary flows and seizing money and showing where we could find it. On the other hand, for different titles that we were operating under, it was moving money and showing how we can do that and creating front companies and layering all that stuff. So when I came out, and I knew a ton about the Iranians, in particular, IRGC and the Qods Force, and how the bonyads all worked. So when I got out of doing that work in between for a bit, because the contract had canceled, went to work for a consulting company, and I go in there doing like anti-money laundering stuff, and I go in these big banks. I'm like, let me show you where I can find this, and I doing all this data analysis. I'm like, this is your guy, these are your guys, these are your people, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Unless that's red flag, we don't want to know about it. Because if we recognize it, then we're going to have to do something about it, and then we're going to have to go to the regulators, and we're going to have to, share that we knew this, we found it, and then we're going to have fines, and then we're going to have investigation. We're going to spend millions. So really, when we're talking about, okay, by putting $10,000, the civil liberties being, screwed over, not so much, because to a certain degree, they really didn't even want to look into it. I even started looking at it from a fraud standpoint of how you're defrauding people in certain company or certain terrorist groups or criminal groups are defrauding people, and so let's track that down next. They didn't give a shit, because after it was like less than $2 million or $1 million, they just write it off. It was cheaper than the investigation. So I think when people get their shorts all up in a bunch about what's going to happen because you're going to check out my money and check all this stuff, no, they'll write up a SAR. Nothing's going to happen for the most part. And if you're taking $12,000 out of your Aunt Judy's, trust account for you or something early, nobody gives a shit. And
right.
And so even if you like $20,000 out of somebody else's account for some weapons or something, maybe if they've already got a bead on you, as I'm sure you've learned from Secret Service. I mean, you guys are the ones that are doing a lot of the money laundering investigations and a lot of those types of things. And there's just certain amount that you're just like,
not
a prime target,
right.
Not a prime target.
So this is going on. Do you actually ever, like, it feels like to me like someone with your background never really retires. Now, obviously, with you doing the cybersecurity stuff now, you're still in that world per se. But like, how do you does writing give you the avenue to kind of shut your mind off and just kind of drift away from that world? Like, how does it kind of how do you shut your head off from just thinking about this stuff 24/7?
I don't stop thinking about it. So, retiring I could do really easily if I had the financial means. And I think writing is something that I hope that in time will help sustain or support with a little bit of extra income if I can ever, get out there a little bit more. But I think initially for me, the writing came as a way to stay connected to that community. I had the opportunity where, I don't think again, this isn't like putting me on the couch with psychoanalysis, but I don't think I really felt part in growing up or high school, part of that elite team where I had my identity. You know how some people in high school can peak because they're on the captain of the football team or something like that. Mine didn't happen in high school, and in college it kind of didn't happen so much there either. But when you have an opportunity to be working for the elite of the intelligence community, and then doing mission support for JSOC elements, and the best of the best in that capability, you can't say a lot. So I think you just know it, but you can rub elbows with those people and know that you're maybe part of that cool kid camp.
Yeah.
But when you leave it, and again, mine was so abrupt because a lot of the work I was doing was under these like obscure contracts, and after sequestration, they cut a lot of those contracts off, not even knowing who was where. And I'm working for some Air Force base as like a naval. I got a naval CAC or something. They don't know what the hell I was actually doing. And or working for a company and getting paid by somebody else. And then all of a sudden that stuff kind of goes away. And now all of a sudden, they're like, well, you can pack up everything and you can move out here. And we can try to find you another job a little bit more formally. But that wasn't necessarily going to pay the bills or, work within the timing. I had, some clearances that were coming up again.
Yep.
And I couldn't even get the paperwork in, because then it wasn't under contracts or it wasn't under the right people. They didn't know. In some cases, I didn't even know where to submit all of it back through or who to reach. So it got complicated. And I think there for a bit, I was having so much fun, feeling like I was doing some really cool stuff, very, good stuff. And in some cases, I definitely felt like I was probably one of the subject matter experts in the field, and, probably maybe that top 1 or 2% that could actually do it. And it was just done. And so I think ultimately when I started writing it, I never wanted to expose it, but I do feel like I had to kind of feel like I was maintaining that identity or that toe still in, because it was so hard to get there. And there was like no other way I could have ever done it again or told somebody how to get back into that I felt like that might be it. And so I think that's kind of my way of still thinking through the types of stuff that I love to think through, stay connected. And even though it was fictional, maybe characterize myself in some of those roles, even though I wasn't, going abroad and doing all of that stuff. Definitely not a shooter, but just to kind of feel that connectedness. I do feel like it was a little bit cathartic, and
Yeah.
and I think that kind of went on until a particular component said, yeah, you're not able to do that writing anymore, because we're never going to pass it through. And that was then again a little frustrating because I was playing by the rules. So I kind of felt again like shit. And that's when I got into the horror there for a while.
Well, that's a good transition because I've only known you as JT, the horror writer. And so our mutual friend Eric Bishop, I was like, hey, do you know any authors? And it's like, because I grew up on Stephen King, Peter Benchley. I love traditional horror, evil, and creature feature type stuff, Michael Crichton.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, you gotta check out JT. Can you write something like this? Because I love like True Blood meets like Gothic, whatever, which is your forte clearly in the horror genre. So like when I read Whispers of Gypsy or Brothers of Blood, uh, it was like this is surreal. But then when I realized that you actually wrote like traditional espionage thrillers, Task Force Orange series per se, I have never read one of those books, but I can only imagine how creative and visceral you are in this horror world, like how it could be perceived. Because with your background and how awful the world really is, putting that into like the thriller community, it's like I'm just trying to. I don't know many authors that are able to jump back and forth like you have,
Yeah.
and kind of touch upon that where you transition to thriller writing, then into the horror community, and like, what do you miss or love about both?
So a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I don't know that I've necessarily successfully done it. I think the work is good, but I haven't, achieved that arrival. The books are still not in stores and stuff, and I think there's still kind of limited readership for a lot of them. Maybe it's a best kept secret type thing, but I think ultimately I take a look at the books that I write are definitely still in the realm of black ops, discrete operations, things like that. Okay, so even with horror, the reason that you don't walk out across the street and see a vampire maybe is because it's black ops world. It's below the radar. It's in a hidden society, hidden communities, and stuff like that. Don't want to be found. So where I look at it as trying to find a terrorist, I might do the same thing with the monsters of where would they be located? What would their evolution have been? How would that whole thing have kicked off? And so I think that most of the horror that I write is kind of realistic in that it had to have an origin someplace. Let me explain it so I can rationalize how this is true, even though it may not be. And I think that lends itself to a little different way of looking at horror because it all of a sudden becomes very realistic. I think the other thing then that I do by being a thriller writer first is I up the tempo because I read a lot of books, but I like them to be a little bit faster paced. And I do like watching movies even more. So I try to make the books a little bit more cinematic so that you can kind of go through it quick, even if you're doing an audio book. I mean, there's some great books. I remember a book, espionage book, Red Sparrow. I loved it, but it took me like 2 months of commuting back and forth just to listen through the whole thing. I could hardly do it. I remember Terry Hayes' I Am Pilgrim. I thought it was a great book, but I would read it when I was traveling and I was so tired and I just kept falling asleep because to me, it was a snoozer. But it had so much great stuff in there. So I try to, put, whether it's my thrillers, whether it's my horror books, I like them to be a little bit shorter, faster paced. Let's get some things going in there, but let's also make it realistic. So either one, you feel like you're in that world and you're part of the secret world. And I think that's where the accolades that I have gotten from folks has been, this is really different. Even the military thrillers, I mean, the market is saturated. Same with horror, but to be able to write a werewolf movie or a book or a vampire book that's still different, I think that's something that I've been able to pull off. Same thing with like the Black Ops books that I have, because again, you can write about Navy SEALs and Delta Force all day long, but unless you've been in some of the other layers that are lower than that, there is no way you're going to be able to come up with that shit. And I think that's what kind of makes it real, because it's dirty, and I think sometimes people think, how was it easy to cross over? No, my thriller books, really, if you take the true word of horror and that sense of dread and some of the gruesomeness and stuff like that, and the evil that lurks, I've been writing horror the whole time.
Yeah, it takes balls, I think, to, when you look at like the traditional like horror, like Dracula, werewolf, mummy, Frankenstein, some of the it's one thing to say you're gonna write a werewolf book or a book about vampires or whatever, but to actually do it and make it where it stands out. Where I think a lot of literature today, it's all, and I don't blame Twilight, because good on them for creating this, Buyer for creating this amazing franchise, right? Global brand. But I think people that were chasing that type of vampire lost sight of the fact that vampires, the werewolf lore has gone through ages, and you can have fun with it. It doesn't have to really stick to the same type of like parameters that it was already established. And I think that's why with Supernatural, something like you, it's like you can have fun with this. It's still seeped in like the lore of these creatures, but it's 2024, and here we are having like a new vision on something that's already been established.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so in Whispers of a Gypsy, which is getting redone into a different title, because even though it was a pejorative word of gypsy, it was intentional. But it's you still don't. A lot of people don't want to put that on a bookshelf. But what I liked about that character was to be able to create a monster out of something horrific that happened during World War II. And, if you're a Marvel fan, you'll know how like this super serum actually, came about. But if you really researched into what was going on with the human testing of the Jews and the Gypsies, amongst others, what they were looking for in the Clotho genes and other type of genetic mutations and changing those things, now all of a sudden, this is how we could make this real. And I think that's what that I found was missing from like a lot of monster books of how they actually could happen. I mean, Frankenstein, yeah, with the electricity and electrodes, if you could take that a little bit deeper in what that would do from a cellular perspective, I thought that was kind of cool, and how you'd have to regenerate yourself by eating blood or stem cells and stuff like that, which is how Mr. Mortimer came about. With the Brothers of Blood, my wife and I were in New Orleans, and we were hearing about the Carter brothers that are supposed
Yeah.
vampires there. But for the most part, if you look historically, they're probably serial killers. So how do you take that and turn the lore into something that is okay, feasible, and let's play with the vampire thing? And is it a vampire with an I or a vampire with a Y, where they're not necessarily undead, but they're still doing the same thing as vampires, but maybe they're in New Orleans. So I like playing with those type of things. Same thing with like the Rougarou, instead of just a werewolf, but taking that legend of the swamps and how part of that curse could be just offsetting nature and having to pay your price back to nature. And I think those are some kind of interesting twists versus just making another slasher, which are fun, but adding a little bit more of that historical element, which I kind of like to geek out on a little bit and
No, for
researching.
sure. And you've often described your work as Chicago Gothic, which based on the setting where you're from and stuff, I get it. But what makes it? It's tough for me to explain. Like I picture when I'm reading your stuff, especially like the vampire stuff, it's almost like it's like a concoction of like Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire, meets like this seedy like underbelly, like an 80s like bar room. But it's like, is that how you interpret like the gothic? Because like, when people ask like, "Oh, I love gothic neo noir thrillers or gothic crime novels," it's like, well, what makes something gothic? Like, describe what that is to you.
Yeah, so a lot of the elements of horror that are found in Gothic and some of the characters, and how those stories evolve is a little bit more on that Gothic realm. So a lot of times people think of it as just the four poster beds,
Yeah.
and mansions and stuff like that. But Gothic actually is even getting into society and digging in a little bit deeper into some of that darkness. And so that's where I definitely feel like the Gothic element comes about, and it's also part of your location of what you're going to do. So if you're talking about Southern Gothic, you still have kind of that cultural dynamic underneath and the people and the individuals, but then you're adding in that setting. So in the case of what I've been doing with like the New Orleans stuff, even though I'll call it Chicago Gothic, is yeah, it's definitely Southern Gothic from that standpoint of the setting, and especially the period piece with the Brothers of Blood. But I think from being the writer coming from Chicago, and my style is it's kind of that Chicago in your face, matter
Yeah.
of fact, kick you in the teeth, um,
Abrasive. Yeah.
abrasive. It's going to be offensive in some ways, and so I think that's kind of my style, and I think that permeates through really all of the books that I write. It's not for the faint of heart. It's real, it's raw, and maybe it's just not as commercially viable.
Yeah. The one of our mutual friends, Gabriel Iglesias, incredible horror writer. Can't
Yeah.
recommend him enough. But he tweeted out something the other day where it's like he basically said, "Fuck rules. There are no rules in writing. Do what makes you happy. Push the parameters. Push the boundaries." Did you ever feel like you yourself were ever like kind of jumping into like starting with a thriller world where I think it's already pre-established that unless you are uh, a Tom Clancy or a Jack Carr, or there's certain parameters you have to fill. The best books in those genres, I found the ones that push that or just knock down the walls. It's like, did you ever feel constricted in the idea of jumping into these genres, being like, well, I can't do this because not many people find this successful or it doesn't work?
Yeah. So, you and I think have talked a little bit about some of the boys down south, in country music, and
Yes.
I'm an avid Hardy fan.
Yeah.
I love the shit out of his lyrics and writing, and the Mockingbird and the Crow was one of the most pertinent songs I've ever heard to my life. Of you can be that mockingbird or you can be that crow. And so just as Hardy talks about initially how he just had to do whatever he had to appease, to get in, and then he was able to then have that platform so that he could be the Crow. I definitely felt that with my initial writing. So the first series that I was writing was just, that was kind of me. But I was told you got to tone it down. It's not commercial enough. So that's when I created the Task Force Orange series, and that was, as you'll read that first one, very commercially viable. They had me change things so that it was going to fit a little bit more. Second one, God, as they gave me a little bit more rope, I took it. And it got a little bit darker again, and it was a little bit less commercially viable. I think at that point in time, then there were some things that they wanted me to do with it that I was just absolutely unwilling to bend for. And it came at a good timing where DoD and the IC was also putting some more constraints. And so it was kind of like, let's just say it's this, and just kind of part ways. And that allowed me to be the Crow for Whispers of a Gypsy and some of these other things. But it's a balance, and I'm not, and I think it probably comes a little bit from my background experience. I try to be below the radar. I'm not really out there on social media. I don't be this, you got to buy my book and this is the best ever. I'm like, just kind of, if you like it, great. If you find it, it's like no different. Tell a friend type thing. There's a certain point where if I do want to achieve some commercial success, I'm going to have to put it out there a little bit more. Just like the changing of the name Whispers of a Gypsy, it's pretty out there. It's because it is what it is. And if you think about who it was occurring to, and because I want to create some of that shock factor, you read it, you'll get it. But to be on the bookshelf, now it's going to be called The Hidden. And so we had to massage it. So I think there are some trade-offs, and somewhere in the middle, and I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, well, it's at least with me, it's like I'm doing this book of poems I started through the pandemic, which is all range of emotions. Watching this comic book where it's World War II horror. There's a werewolf type creature, but like just more. That's just not even really the part with me. It's the story. And then this other project you and I are working on, where it's very much steeped in the horror community that no one's figured out yet, which is amazing. But I found that when I get to, like, for me to be my true self as an artist, I have to be in the most like shitty dark spot in my head, and like for me, I guess what I'm trying to say is, in art, my art is the most profound when it's the darkest, when it's like it's the most truest version of itself. Where I don't know how people like yourselves, and then we're going to talk about your music stuff too, where it's like you jump in these fields that the preconceived notion is this is the rules you have to play by to be successful. Well, then we start looking, you pull that back. It's like, well, define success. Success for some people might be being a New York Times bestseller, 10 millions of books, movies, TV shows, t-shirts, whatever. Success might be getting the best version of your story out and just for yourself. And it's like trying to find that balance of sacrificing art to chase, because me saying I don't care about the financial the wherewithal that comes with creating art and putting it out there. Sure, everyone wants to make money off whatever.
Yep.
But if your first act is to make X amount of dollars per book you sell, I think you've kind of already lost, at least internally, when it comes to like what your art is supposed to be. And I don't know, like, it's hear you talk about that kind of gives me like confidence to be like, you know what, just put it out there. And eventually the right person is going to read it. They're going to pass it on to the right person. And I think it's especially the gothic, that horror, that whole like Southern Gothic vibe. It's like there's so much to that. And I think people have this idea that, oh, I already watched a successful show like True Blood, and that's all I'm going to need from the Gothic horror. Well, hold on a second. It goes much deeper like that. It get darker and dirtier too. And it's kind of like whatever I can do to help do the podcast and just promoting stuff where it's like, hey, there's other subsets of these worlds and stuff that people have created some really cool stuff, painting, poems, stories, songs. And it's cool hearing you talk like that.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I find myself in the same shoes as you often, where the dark stuff kind of comes natural. I think that's where some of that creativity comes in. There's the one, if you think about how to be successful in life, meeting people and stuff like that, you don't want to be negative. How to be that upbeat person. Okay. So if somebody's looking for that upbeat, great story, great song, great book or something, wrong guy. I am the wrong guy for that. And so, but I think that ultimately, yeah, that helps people. I mean, personally, I like listening to some of that stuff too, but I also like to go pretty hard, pretty dark on some things. When I write this character Drake Wolf, I go deep and dark. Shinedown's got some great stuff to just put my head in that space.
Yeah.
And a lot of others, can do that. Sometimes I have to really step away from it, lift myself up, get into some commercial country or something like that. Even like my kids are playing Taylor Swift in the house, something like that. Great lyrics. I can just listen to it because it just creates a different mood. But yeah, when I'm doing my best creative work, it's dark and it's going to have a smaller audience, that's for sure. And you'd mentioned the music. There for a time I was writing some music under NDA for somebody else and just putting it out there, and they could kind of do it. When I decided to kind of do it on my own after a friend had kind of encouraged me, who's out in Nashville, and it's like, like you're writing, you've done all this stuff, just put some of your own stuff out there. It wasn't the same experience I thought I was going to get, in that I thought I'd be able to kind of just put it out there and it'd be good enough. But going through the mechanics and the channels, I had to learn a lot more again about the industry from a different side than I knew it of, and it's changed over the last couple of years. So as I was doing this towards that country market, I also thought people love outlaw music. And when I put that out there, the feedback I got was like, holy shit, not that outlaw. And and so I'm like, come on, if you're gonna shoot a guy in the head, you're gonna shoot a guy in the head. If you got a preacher who was a drug user and an ex-biker, and all of a sudden he gets a call and he decides he's gonna exact revenge and just kick somebody out, turn his back on God, and just go with it, that's that. And to me, that was awesome. But what I then, so once I had those things there and I couldn't get anybody to produce them necessarily, or they said, with the Nashville stuff, it's like, you got to have a demo. I don't play music myself, not to the point where I'd be able to get what I want. So I had to partner with these younger, less experienced people that were looking for their go, and then we did the demos. But then it wasn't quite a Nashville demo, which is almost like a fully produced radio piece. So then I found myself, now I'm doing production work to either do it myself, because I just figure it out to a degree, or get some other people. And so I think that kind of played back into the intelligence game of getting people to do certain things that you need them to do, and influencing. And we've put out some good music as polished demos, but the commercial viability of some of it still isn't quite there, because it's raw, it's pretty dark, and but I can even with some of my own family, it's like, can you just write something a little upbeat and that? And I tried to write something for my mom, which was an Alzheimer's piece, and that's about as upbeat as I get on anything, because it's heartfelt talking about. But even then, it's a little dark, it's a little gloomy. And so my answer is no, I don't. Maybe it's a character flaw, but I can't. That's not where my creativity comes out, because I think there's something that's being let out, and that's darker, But I think, and I was just talking to somebody not too long ago about special mission units and how some of that stuff went, and they're like, isn't everybody a sociopath or a psychopath, that's doing that stuff? And I'm like, maybe there are some tendencies to that, and where you gravitate to some of that, especially in the darker world of operations and intelligence and stuff. But I think the one thing that everybody has is that moral code. So yeah, you can flip it on, but you're following a line of morality, and so you don't do it. And I think so, even with the darker music, the darker stories, there is still kind of a moral code that I have in there that kind of keeps it on track. Maybe keeps myself on track to a lot of that stuff. And it just takes the right audience to be able to recognize that. And I just maybe haven't found it just yet.
I would dare to say your music, for anyone that wants it, I highly suggest search it out and find it. It's like Americana, like Cody Jinks meets like Dusk Till Dawn, Timmy Twister. Like it's super visceral, but like you feel for these people in the setting, and like the music is very like, I don't ride a motorcycle, but this is the type of music I would jump on a bike without without a helmet and go down Highway 66 looking to run into a vampire. Like that's like, and I think there's something really cathartic to that and fun. Like that's what I miss about music, where people take chances. And yes, it's a very specific type of music, but I don't know. Like I find that when I have like a good time, I'm listening to that rockabilly, Brian Seltzer, Americana, Cody Jinks, Ghoul Town type,
Yeah.
just very much just balls to the wall, visceral storytelling with some great musicianship.
Yeah, there are some out there. I had a pleasure, and I hopefully they're going to record it. It's a group called the Nick Tower Band.
Oh
They
yeah,
go
yeah,
hard. They are
yeah.
from Pennsylvania. Those guys are so good. So they picked up a song of mine, Preacher Man, and I think they're going to have a lot of fun with that one. There was one that I had that made it to a fairly prominent commercial artist. My song Tackle Box. They liked the song of it and they loved how it was going. And literally about the third meeting that we had, and they're going through it, they're like, wait a second, this isn't about a kid and his grandpa. Does he kill the grandpa? I'm like, yeah. They're like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, the guy was drunk, he's an alcoholic and he'd suppressed that, and they thought he was drinking beers with his grandpa, but he ended up getting in a drunk accident and killing the guy, and now he's shunned from the family and he's thinking about killing himself. So at the very end of the thing, you're trying to decide, does he,
Yeah.
when he's calling up to grandpa, is grandpa, can you put in a good word for me, because I'm about to kill myself because I'm just so desperate, but I got to know, am I going to see you again, or am I going to go someplace else? And so all of a sudden they're like, that's not as where we thought this was going, now that we hear it. And so that was kind of the end of that, but it's still out there.
When it comes to the writing preparation, does that process change when it comes to writing a song or starting a book? Like, how does that work for you?
A little bit of both. So when I started off writing, I was a pantser, just
Yeah,
go.
just get it out. Yeah.
But then I got a little bit more mechanical, because I wasn't making a lot of money, so I had to figure out what mechanically is going to sell, how much I need to write. So then I started structuring it a little bit more. I think as I started structuring more, I became a lot more intentional with almost every sentence that I write, or every paragraph I write, and every chapter. And what I loved writing the music for, and even short stories, is you become very, very intentional about every single word, every single sentence. So as much as I liked writing the music just for some creativity aspects of it, it's a really awesome exercise to train yourself to have that rhythm, have that melody going in like you can even in the story, so that you're reading something, but it's like it's flowing. And I think that my writing's gotten a little bit better since I was doing a lot more music for a bit, because now you can almost hear kind of some sing-songy stuff to it, and certain patterns in it, and so I think that it's given it another little bit of a creative flair versus just throwing some words down and having some things that don't really mean. You've got to be really intentional, and I think that's where I think if there's anything I feel like I've evolved in the storytelling, definitely the musicality of my storytelling and the intentionality of my words, which is where I'm again hoping I can find that right audience. Because if you start dumbing that down with just the commercial rules of what it's got to be, I'm going to lose some of that, because when they say, yeah, just strip this out, I'm like, no, that word was in there for a reason. And you'll find that it goes back to something later on when that word is used again. But if you don't see that big picture, you're going to miss it, and you're just going to like, that didn't seem to make sense.
Have you
Versus
ever
other
looked
people that have aha.
right? Have you ever looked at one of your songs and been like, "Fuck, I wish I could make this a bigger story"? Or like the flip side of that, how hard would it be to take say like Brothers of Blood and turn that into a song?
So for our project, the Dark Riders
Yep.
was first a song, and that's that hard charging.
Yeah.
I've got kind of a Scandinavian version of it, and I've got a country rock version of it, and that's where it's basically the part two of Ghost Riders in the Sky. Johnny Cash sung it. He wasn't the original one that wrote it. But what happens when you didn't heed the devil's call and change your ways? And so this is what happens years later, as now a biker is doing that and doesn't change his ways. And so for our little project, that's what I converted into our short story, with a little bit more twists and stuff. But yeah, I thought that was really fun. And even that could grow into something more for screen or something like that, enhancing it. So it starts out at the micro and can expand, or you can take something larger and bring it down. And, it's fun. I think you can pretty much do that with about anything.
Yeah. We'll have to talk off the record, but as I'm doing this comic book thing and building out the world, I have this character where I'm kind of like, he's very distinct, like where you visually you can see how cool this person is. But I've been trying to create this character where it has like a guitar, not a good guitar, World War II, it's beat up, shot at, whatever it is. But he's able to like almost do like a, not like The Witcher where it's like announcing the people coming through, but when they have the quiet moments, he's always noodling or playing with the guitar. And I'm trying to just hearing you talk about that, I'm like, oh fuck, I should just have JT help me create this character and help me kind of flesh this person out, because it's it's cool seeing music in like the world of books, where it's like I've always found those characters to be like the people I kind of gravitate towards, because they're doing an art piece in an actual piece of art that we're reading, and I'm kind of like always picture what they would look like, how they perform live and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool seeing your like approach towards music and literature.
Yeah, it's fun. Love to chat about that thing too. I think there's so many situations like that in life that you can develop. One of my favorite singer songwriters, guy, but Stephen Wilson Jr.
Oh,
and I saw him. I've met him a few times now, seen him in small venue concerts. But if you ever look at his guitar,
it's beat up.
Beat to shit. It is beat to shit. The stories that guitar has gone through is got to be just kind of amazing, or an opportunity to completely develop into a character. And that character, there was a proposal that I'd made to a gun magazine some years back. It ended up being a short story, into something else. But what I wanted to do is have like this weapon system. It was a Springfield at the time that we were looking at, their Saint, and it was going to be this weapon as it changed hands from soldier to soldier to soldier. Maybe it was picked up in the field, maybe it was stolen, maybe it was whatever, and then having these vignettes of that whole thing. And I think that there's so many little objects of mementos that we can take and you can write, and you can really talk about how it shapes a character based on just their passion, their love for it, or what have you. So I think in your situation, I mean, there's just a wealth of information, places that thing could go.
Yeah, it's surreal. It's we'll definitely talk about that. Before I let you go, if people want to, I know you got a website, but if people want to order books, check out books, check music, is that the website the best spot? Should we go to Amazon to get books?
The website's probably the easiest. jtpattenbooks.com. You can trace that. The music stuff goes to Lone Wolf Lyrics. And then I think that bounces over to like Spotify and probably SoundCloud the most, I think, for things. But just different versions. And I think everything's found on Amazon right now. I think the only thing you can't find right now is Howl of the Hunted, which is the audiobook of the werewolf one. We're still trying to sell that for print, but at least people can listen to it if they're looking for some kind of fun short audiobooks, or you're heading out to New Orleans.
And you're on Instagram at JT Patten Books, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much pimp myself with that heading for about everything. So
yeah, it's good. I highly suggest people give you a follow and check it out. And I can't wait to actually tell people what the bigger project we're doing. But yeah, it's super surreal getting involved with a bunch of different authors and people that aren't traditional authors, kind of doing something cool like this. So it's awesome. But yeah, I appreciate your time.
Glad you're able to get Gabino in there too, and there's some fun stuff coming up.
It's funny, like we did that tease a couple months ago. People are like, what the hell? Like they think it. Honestly, people think it's guests coming on the podcast, and so I'll get messages from people. Oh, you had Ava, you had. I'll tease you, but oh, okay, so it's his checklist, or whatever. It's like when people finally realize what it is, I think it's gonna be it's gonna be fucking rad. So
I'll punch him in the face.
Yeah, all the faces. So, but yeah, thank you, JT, for this. Yeah. Much love and respect, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Same, brother. Thanks much.
Oh, hello. I'm just enjoying this nice fucking candle. Anyways, I'm John, the host of Spear Talk, and I want to talk to you about nice fucking candles. We are lucky to have Nice Fucking Candles as a sponsor of the podcast. And if you use code SpearTalk15, you get 15% off your first order, or use the affiliate link below to always get your candle needs through Nice Fucking Candles. Nice Fucking Candles are 100% soy wax. They have a 65-hour burn time, maybe more if you nurse the flame a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not an expert on flames or candles, but I will say these things burn a long fucking time. You ask me about the wick. It's a double wick for even burning, which is amazing. And they come in 3 incredible flavors. I'm not sure if you're going to be eating these candles, but if you do like them, the scents are eucalyptus and ginseng, tobacco and fireside, and seaside and driftwood. Once again, Nice Fucking Candles. They are the candle company for Spear Talk. And if you love candles and need a good scent to clear out your office, your room, your podcast room, your weight room, your whatever you're doing in a room that smells like crap, use this candle. It's amazing. Thank you. Check them out. Love Nice Fucking Candles.